Welcome back to the Brave Writer podcast, which is professional development for the parent educator. We are so glad that you're here. Hello, Melissa.
Hi, Julie. Hello, everybody.
It's great to have everyone return week by week. What do we have on the menu of ideas today, Melissa?
I am so intrigued by this term that you shared with me. Did you make this up, Julie? Did you come up with FOMU, fear of messing up?
I don't know if I can take credit for it, but I can't remember learning it either. So, so I might have.
I really love it. Like, we all know what FOMO is, fear of missing out.
Yes.
But fear of messing up, I just reading it, I was like, oh, yeah, okay.
So many of us live with this persistent feeling of not getting enough done or doing the wrong things or having regrets later that our kids point out to us. And I think that can really dominate our imaginations when we're trying to lesson plan and execute. We're wondering if we are messing up, not just that we might be missing out or that we might be missing information, but that we're doing it wrong. I think that is really what we want to talk about today. Not just not doing enough, but what if you're not doing it correctly or right, or you're making a big mistake?
That's what I like about the phrase, because it immediately speaks to this sense that we have that there is a correct, there is a right, and that it's possible to not meet some kind of set of standards or benchmarks or invisible metrics. And I think a lot of that sense for people of my generation, really for anybody who went to school, I think a lot of it comes from school.
For sure. If you think about the standards of most classes, you're being measured all the time against what's called 100%, right? 100% attendance. I mean, there are kids who get awards at some schools for never missing a day of school, as though being at every single day of school is an achievement. You know what I mean? Like, the only time you don't go to school is when you're sick. So why would you suddenly be rewarded for going to school every single day? Does that mean that you are going to school while you're sick, right? So there's the metric of 100% for attendance, for performance on exams, for completion of homework. We always start with 100%. Anybody who plays Wordle knows that the first time you miss, you can never get back to 100%, right? That is one of the dangers of a metric that is what I would call perfection oriented, right? It's saying the standard is perfection. So how far short is it okay to fall? I think that's really the spirit of the fear of messing up. How low can I go and still be okay?
That sense of perfectionism, the idea that there is a perfect and that we're being measured by how close we come to that standard, I think really haunts people. I've seen it in parents. I've seen it in kids for sure. So like, what is perfectionism, and is it ever appropriate?
You know, perfectionism, according to Psychology Today, it defines it like this. For perfectionists, life is an endless report card on accomplishments or looks. It's a fast and enduring track to unhappiness, and perfectionism is often accompanied by depression and eating disorders. What makes perfectionism so toxic is that while those in its grip desire success, they are most focused on avoiding failure. So theirs is a negative orientation. And this longer quote ends by saying this: the need for perfection is usually transmitted in small ways from parents to children, some as silent as a raised eyebrow over a B rather than an A. And that really struck me. You know, when we talk about perfectionism, we are talking about some kind of performance metric that we're trying to enforce. And a lot of us grew up even in families where grades were rewarded, where expectations were made explicit or implicit through the raised eyebrow or withholding of affection. And we internalize the messaging that we aren't acceptable until we hit that perfect standard, that anything short means we're failing in some meaningful way.
And that certainly hits home pretty hard for me. I remember that like an A- felt like I blew it.
Wow. I mean, what a heavy burden to carry. Because if the goal is to never make a mistake, it means that guilt is what you feel when you make a mistake. But guilt is not appropriate to mistakes. Guilt is appropriate when we have actually transgressed something meaningfully. We've chosen a path that later we look at and realize I transgressed a value. But guilt over not getting everything right on an exam, that is not appropriate guilt. That is the belief that no matter what you do, you can do it without error. And that doesn't exist in the world of learning. Learning is riddled with risk, error, mistakes, attempts, essays. Literally, the word essay means to attempt. And that's as it should be. This reminds me, yesterday, I had the joy of being with 3 of my grandkids, and my oldest grandchild is a girl, and she is just learning to read. She's 6 years old. So we sat down with her I Can Read reader, and it was fascinating to watch her work through sounding out. And occasionally she'd say to me, "Is that E silent?" And then I would tell her yes or no. And then she would do like a word like best. She'd go b, e, s, t. And then she'd go boost, And then I'd be like, yeah, you're so on it. And then we would go back and read the start of the sentence, and then she would get it. And I thought, can you imagine if she felt pressure to say the word correctly in front of me? If she felt like she couldn't make a mistake, she needed the freedom to give her best effort and then feel encouraged to keep trying.
Yes, where the iterating is the experience. I really think the most transformative moment for me in terms of being a homeschooling mom was recognizing the power and role of the mistake in the learning process. And I've shared that when I came, many years later to this foreign language program, that it's just baked in. The teacher's always like, did you mess it up? That's good. That's going to help your brain remember it better the next time. Embracing mistakes was a hard hill for me to climb for myself, right? But with little kids, because you're watching mistakes and failing and trying again and again be the process of infancy, toddlerhood, early childhood, it seems natural. And as then a homeschooler, we just got to stay in that state of, as you put it, risk, error, mistakes, attempts.
It's one thing to create space for our kids to have these learning moments, right? But what I notice is that a lot of times home educators apply perfectionism to themselves. They have a certain image in their mind that lives as the model homeschool, right? So I thought it might be interesting to, just before we kind of launch into the content, Melissa, when you started homeschooling, what did the ideal homeschool look like to you in your imagination, and how close were you to recreating that in your home?
Did you ever read Little Men by Louisa May Alcott?
I did, long time ago.
So Jo is all grown up. She's married Mr. Bear, and they have a couple of kids. They're living in Plumfield, and they open a school, and there's all these it's mostly boys. There were 2 girls, and the kids are farming, and they're studying Latin, and they're making music. They all play instruments. That was the perfect homeschool in my head. I'm sure there's a direct line from all the fan fiction I wrote in high school about going back in time and living at Plumfield to homeschooling my 6 children. And of course, that model was impossible to pull off in real world conditions.
That's amazing. I know for me, mine was that there would just be this endless quest to learn the school subjects. That if I was doing it correctly, my kids would be like, I can't wait to learn fractions. Tell me more about Grecian vases, right? That's what my expectation was. It was less the look. I'm not a visual person. So I didn't imagine a room with maps on the wall and different color coded file folders. That's not how my brain works. But what I imagined is that my kids wouldn't complain. They would be delight-directed learners at all moments of every day. And so what would happen to me, the way my perfectionism kicked in, is if anyone looked bored or resistant, I must be doing something wrong. It never occurred to me that the human condition includes boredom and sometimes squirreliness and sometimes resistance. Like I had to learn those things as I was doing it by reading books and listening to conversations and going to conferences. I mean, obviously, over time, I learned these things. But when we're talking about how I thought it would be from the beginning and how you thought it would be, you were picturing this one room schoolhouse that had this sort of nostalgia for the past, pre-technology, right? Learning that included farming. And mine was this endless curiosity fueled by a natural disposition to learn. And that it didn't really rely so much on me getting it right. It would just come bubbled up from within and it would be adjacent to the school subjects. When we start with an image, we're already going to fall short because, like I love to say about children, they are free radicals. They are not the result of your imagination or genetics completely. They have their own nature and they will have their own ideas of what a good, satisfying life feels like. Right? Yesterday, I was with my grandchildren. The first thing my grandson wanted to do was show us how he can play this certain game on a video game. That to him was like the highest thing we could be doing while grandparents are visiting. That was not what was in my mind.
Right, right. Oh, the many times that I thought, like, we're all going to enjoy this particular activity. And then the reality is somebody's hungry and somebody got bit by a mosquito and somebody doesn't like the heat. And, like life happened and there was no perfect rolling out of the picture in my head. I think that also happens with homeschooling parents just in the quest for the right method or the right materials. And the internet accelerated that because now we can see everybody else's methods and materials, and you're constantly comparing and thinking, oh, maybe that would be the one, because in your head, there's this sense that then I could make it perfect.
Correct. Melissa, one of the things that I think drives this perfectionism is the feeling that somebody else is evaluating you. And whether it is in your peer group or it is literally the state or your charter school, a lot of times it is also just the anxiety that your child will grow up to evaluate you. So I've heard about like the current, but then I will have parents come to me and say, what if my child regrets that I homeschooled them? Or what if my child tells me I didn't prepare them well enough? Have you heard those as reasons to be perfectionists?
I have. And I always think, yeah, but what if they went to school and and they wish that you had homeschooled them because their school experience can't be perfect either.
That's so true, but at least it wouldn't be on me. We could just all yell at the school.
Right.
Right. So I think that's the problem. It feels so much more personal. And so you have this level of personal accountability. Well, there are certain symptoms of perfectionism in homeschool that you and I have identified. The first one is that it's possible your goals are too high. I know for me that one of the problems for each grade level for me was that I didn't always have a comprehensive idea of what the goals were for that year. And so I would try to find out what the scope and sequence was for like the school in my neighborhood, and nowadays that's all online and you can look at it. But then sometimes the language felt so educationalese that I couldn't quite translate it into my real life practical application. And so I found myself floundering, like, how do I know that I'm not leaving out something really important? I'll give you a good example. When I was teaching Noah in second grade, but that's before the internet, I remember seeing in a book that second graders in most schools learned the Song of Hiawatha, the poem. And I immediately was like in panic. I have not taught the Song of Hiawatha to my kid. And then I paused and thought, I don't remember ever studying that in my life. And I kind of calmed down. And we actually did go ahead and read the poem because it's beautiful. But it's funny how even if you consult your own experience, you abandon yourself for some standard that you just happened upon somewhere on the internet. How did I miss the Song of Hiawatha? Did that ever happen to you?
I kept encountering this sense that there was no consensus. I think I entered homeschooling with an idea that there was certain knowledge and certain skills that we all agreed upon. It was not an articulated idea. It was a sense. And as soon as I started looking at how to make that happen on a practical level, I realized, oh, it's all over the place. In this school district, they're doing it in this order. And in this different whole type of educational paradigm, they're learning other things. They're leaning into handcrafts and story, and structure was different. Content was different. The values placed on particular skills was different. So the fact that there was no consensus was at first sort of bewildering, and then freed me up because I recognized, oh, okay, so there is no map. There's no roadmap that works for everybody. What it meant for me, though, is that I kept going down various trails and then switching. Oh, I'm going to do it this way. We're going to learn this stuff. And then I think this is where perfectionism comes in, right? Like I embraced this particular type of learning, whether it was Charlotte Mason, unschooling, Waldorf-inspired, classical, whatever it was. I always hit the gap between the idealized vision and real life. And that's where perfectionism can derail you.
Yes. And there can be, we've talked about this on the podcast before, the purists in those disciplines can make it seem as though it will all go better if you do it perfectly, right? Like you're not allowed to step outside of whatever the prescribed methodology teaches. So whether it's using the right language to describe what you're doing or reading only the books prescribed by Charlotte Mason from the early 20th century, or only using the Waldorf inspired color wheel, or, like when you get into a system, you will often find that if you start failing in the system, you are blamed for not applying it effectively enough, thoroughly enough. And for me, the fear of messing up is the feeling of failing to live up to the proposed ideals of whatever group I've joined.
And it's because those proposed ideals seem to promise an outcome.
Yes, they do. And they promise a superior outcome to any other method. And then you feel like a heretic if you say anything like, hey, I really did apply what you're talking about. It didn't work for my kids. And they're like, no, that can't be true. Because the method always works. And so if you somehow have a child who did not adopt the method, it's your fault for not doing it well enough. Fear of messing up is that feeling that somehow you are going to screw up the guaranteed outcome. And we should just start right there. Homeschooling guarantees no better outcomes than school. I just want to say that right now. These are human interactions. Humans have failings. Humans have gaps, limits. They cannot cover everything. So whether they're in school or at home, the goal cannot be a superior education. You may end up with one accidentally, but that can't be the goal. Melissa, help me. What would you say is a goal that would be better than perfectionism or the application perfectly of any method?
My goal for us as homeschoolers was to center good relationships with ourselves, with each other, with the world. It was about making connections and keeping intact the joy of learning, the zest for finding stuff out. Like that's at the heart of it for me.
You know what? I think that's a really neat quote. A zest for finding things out is a lovely, fresh way of saying a love of learning. A lot of times, as I've said, when parents say they want their kids to love learning, what they really mean is I want them to love what I'm teaching, or I want them to love the school subjects, right? Because all kids love to learn. You can't stop them from learning. It's just they don't always agree with the things you want them to learn. But if you say a zest for finding things out, I think that captures an experience that we are aiming to create that sometimes we feel like isn't happening in school, that school is more about proposed information delivery and home is more about that curiosity driven learning. And so in this process of understanding what it is to overcome perfectionism, I think you've just stumbled on one of our principles, which is outside in thinking. Outside in thinking is when you think that people are describing for you what you should see about your homeschool instead of doing it from the inside out, which is you observing your own children and being reassured by their active engagement in their own lives, right? That
Right.
to me is the big difference. If we're living from the perspective that someone is evaluating us and our children, we are more likely to live in the fear of messing up. But if we're thinking from the inside out, literally acting as detectives to identify places where our children are showing a zest for finding things out, you will start to see momentum build in your homeschool and you'll feel better about what you're doing.
Yes, I think it's encapsulated in this notion of focusing on the process rather than the outcome.
Yeah.
And I think that's at the heart of what many, many homeschoolers are seeking, because I think all parents, we all want the same eventual outcome. We want for our children to thrive in the world, to be happy and to thrive, right? But if the focus can be on that outcome, and that's where this sort of imaginary scenario is created, that it's like always out there. It's like the in through the looking glass, right? Like jam tomorrow, never today. And focusing on process means looking at the jam today,
You know, that's such a good point.
savoring it.
There are times, by the way, when we do make a choice that ends up looking like a mess up. I should just acknowledge that. Like, let's say you use some kind of phonics program with your child that they didn't connect with and they don't read that year. And you recognize, okay, we tried to follow this program. It was unsuccessful. So now I got to try a different one. And then you might say to yourself, well, shoot, now they've lost a whole year when they could have been reading. Or, I wish I had known this. Or if they'd been in school, they probably would have read by now. But all of us are just sort of fumbling in the dark to find that correct corresponding material. I've shared before, I remember one of my kids did high school and she found the daily instruction of math really beneficial. And she said, I kind of wish I had had this like from a math teacher in a school setting. I feel like you weren't as good at math and I didn't get as good a math instruction because of you. Okay. And this is a good example of where, did I mess up? But ironically, I said to her, well, you just have to know, I actually had daily math instruction in a school. That's what produced the teacher you had. So we can't know, is it going to be the school model or the homeschool model that connects? I know for me, the homeschool model as an adult connected with me for math better than anything I learned in school. That's when it all started clicking. It might have just been being in my 30s made it more possible. But we can't know what we don't know. So part of this fear of messing up is the realization that sometimes we use a program that didn't work. We took longer than we thought we would. Our child is resistant to whatever that subject area is. And we start thinking, this is proof I shouldn't be doing this, but really it's just an opportunity for a pivot.
Something else you've talked about as a sign that your homeschool may be leaning into perfectionism is what you call endless quest syndrome. What is that?
For me, the endless quest was finding the perfect path. And I really wanted to lean on this idea that, if we had the right methodology, my life would be easier as a home educator. I mean, I think that's maybe the secret underneath it. Like, I wouldn't have to work so hard because everybody would be in sync and we would be learning and the joy would be overflowing. And so, you buy one, this happens all the time. Parents will invest in a certain program, phonics or writing or reading or math. And then they get online and someone is raving about their success with some other program. Instead of being like, well, the one I'm using is fine, they're like, the one I'm using must be terrible. I should buy yet a new program. I call this throwing the hand grenade into the living room. You've got a perfectly functional homeschool, and suddenly you're like, hey, I'm going to make you learn an entirely new program. And then you can't understand why everybody's rebelling and angry at you. Well, sometimes don't fix what's not broken and give up this quest for perfection and kind of lean into the reliability of routine and what is working well enough.
Yeah, there came a point maybe 10 years in for me where I just had to acknowledge, oh, I like exploring new methods and curricula as a hobby, and I have to treat it like that. It's feeding my interest, but that doesn't mean that it's okay for me to inflict it in that first flush of enthusiasm on my children. And I just learned to cool my jets a little, hold my horses, and let them keep doing what we were already doing. Julie, I just saw a quote that made me laugh so hard. It hit a little too close to home. This woman said, I garden with the enthusiasm of my autism and with the follow through of my ADHD.
That's such a great quote. I totally get that. And honestly, one of the problems with the endless quest mentality is this. You will spend a lot of time reading or watching YouTube videos about a new philosophy or a new product. Your kids are not doing that. So when you suddenly show this great enthusiasm for something new, it's after you've already sat in it for a while and reasoned through all of the, challenges and considerations you had about it to the point where you're convinced. And then what we do is we just plunk this down in front of a child and expect them to show the same enthusiasm we had. We didn't even lead them on any kind of a journey or include their input or get their reaction. And some kids will automatically resist you just because you look excited. Right? They're like, yes. I'm not getting on board with this. She's way too into it. If she's into it, it probably means I've got to do a lot of rethinking and changing and working hard. So one of the ways, if you are reevaluating a program or a system, is to bring your child along and include them in the decision making. Let them look at a sample, have them watch the YouTube with you, and tell them you're going to just buy one lesson and try it out together, and you welcome their feedback. Also give them the incentives, why did it attract you before you plunk it down? Say, you know what I thought was cool about this math program? It uses these wooden Cuisenaire rod manipulatives, and I love the feel of them in my hand, and they're bright colors. Would you be willing to test this? Because I think it looks really cool. That creates an entirely different experience instead of, this is the best method. You have to like it. I just spent $100 on it, right?
Right. That brings it back to iterating.
Yeah, which I love. Are you looking to spark some interest in writing in the new year? I'd like to recommend our Brave Writer online writing classes. They are specially designed for the busy parent. We like to give you immediate support as you face writing obstacles with your child. First of all, Brave Writer takes a unique approach. We think it's important for kids to have supportive encouragement and emotional safety in writing. Our writing coaches are kind, and they offer robust feedback that addresses every part of the writing process, from idea to finished product. Our classes are short. They run between 3 and 6 weeks with rolling enrollment, meaning new classes start every Monday. And because our classes are asynchronous, you can log in when it's convenient for you. Our most popular classes sell out, so register soon. You can see a sample class and learn more about our program by going to the link in the show notes.
Okay, so we've talked about ways that perfectionism can show up for us as homeschoolers. So what do we do about it? What are some remedies for perfectionism?
Well, my favorite injunction for human beings is self-awareness. I just wish we would all be a lot more self-aware. But mostly the best way to be self-aware is to notice your own tells. like you hear someone talking online about a certain program and you notice your self-confidence dipping, that is an opportunity to stop, pause, and notice. Be gentle and kind to yourself. You tend to feel nervous about math. So anytime someone brings up a better program, you immediately tap into your fear of messing up. That's all that's happening right now. And then you can make a decision. Is this important for me to listen to, or shall I close the window and go, scroll on Etsy for new towels?
Right.
Make a decision. We sometimes, for me, what I had to do at a certain point was decide I was done shopping and live with what I had purchased. That is a self-awareness choice. You might have a different one. Another tell for you might be anytime your child doesn't smile, that means you're not doing a good job. Pay attention to how your emotions crater based on the face of your child. Is that worth taking as the raised eyebrow about the A or the B, right? We talked about that at the beginning.
Right.
Are you allowing your child to render a verdict on whether or not you're doing a conscientious job of homeschooling just based by a momentary sigh, kicking the other child under the table, rolling their eyes because they don't want to do 3 more problems? Are we really going to consign our entire homeschools to the temporary emotion of a child?
Right. Right. I think it's very easy because there's so much, it feels like there is so much at stake. You've made a big choice for your family. You want them to be happy, and you're still looking for those signs of performative approval that you were conditioned to look for when you were a child.
That's true.
For self-awareness, I think one of the big moments for me of learning was recognizing my love of novelty and change, and that I had a responsibility to my kids not to inflict that upon them by changing things up all the time, just because that's where the energy is for me.
I love that you said that. One of the questions to ask yourself then is, why are you putting that pressure on yourself or your kids when you do feel the criticism, the inner critic coming up? Because a lot of times what you're experiencing, like you said, it could just be something as simple as boredom, and yet your homeschool is humming along just fine.
Right.
And so what's happening is you're putting pressure on yourself to be creative, but really your self-awareness tells you it's not creativity. I'm just bored. I used to always say, when you start to feel like I need to do something different, pay attention to whether or not that's for you or for your kids. If it's just for you, it's fine. I mean, by my 5th kid, it was nice to have a new reading program. I didn't want to go through the same one I had already done multiple times. But do that at the front end, right? Like for a child, they don't necessarily have that same need for variety that you have because you're a grown-up. And the other thing you can do is sate your own desire to learn instead of inflicting that on your children. So I remember when we were studying Native Americans in California when my kids were young, we started studying South Dakota and Sitting Bull and everything that took place, Custer's Last Stand. And my kids were only interested a little. There was only so much I could get them to be interested in, but I was interested. So I just started reading books from the adult section of the library for my own benefit. So pay attention to that as well. Sometimes you almost feel like you're not justified in learning about it unless you're making your kids learn with you. And that's not true.
Right.
They don't necessarily need to learn as much as you have the interest to know. And that's okay too.
Absolutely. Are there other things that we can do to push back against this sneaky perfectionism?
One of the things that we like to tell parents in Brave Writer is to be where you are, not where you aren't. So like if you're doing a poetry tea time, don't think about the dentist appointment. Don't think about what you're making for dinner. Actually hear the poetry, hear the words, eat the food, drink the tea, feel like you're actually there. And that's true for everything in homeschool, honestly. If you're not really in the read aloud, if you're not sitting with your children who are handwriting, the tendency is to focus on getting through and getting done And then you don't really feel like you've accomplished anything. It's like opposite of what you'd expect. You're like so busy wanting to check things off that you actually don't feel like anyone learned anything. But if you sit in one of the learning experiences without any distraction, you'll be like, wow, we really did work hard on dividing fractions today. That was a lot of work, and they started to get it. That's a really nice feeling instead of, okay, I assigned dividing fractions. Now I'm making lunch. Now I'm nursing the baby. You come back and they did 3 problems. There's no felt sense that learning happened. It's just
Right.
checked off. And that over time builds a lot of anxiety. Like, did we do enough?
Right. I think it can be really challenging because you're juggling a lot of things. But I found in order to be a good listener or just to be able to be present and not have that restlessness of like, I could be making lunch right now, but I want to be here in this moment with them. For me, handwork helped. So it's like the corollary of what we always say for, to help our kids at read aloud time, let them have something to do with their hands. I had to provide that to myself as well. Then I could be present.
We talked about that in Brave Writer. We always recommend that the parent do copy work at the same time as the kids, right? Because you're copying a passage, they're copying a passage. Now everybody's doing the same activity. There is something about that body doubling that helps everybody feel more satisfied. Another thing that I'll mention about copy work, Brave Writer provides inside the Dart and the Arrow the passages, and you can print those out and let your kids copy from them. But we also liked copying from the book. And we used to use these clear page protectors for recipe books. And we would stick the book behind that sort of plastic glass, and it would be propped up for them to copy from. There was something about copying directly from the book that was weirdly satisfying. And so we all would have these little recipe holders with our books on the table. It looked very official. We had music playing in the background. When we talk about satisfying experiences, it helps to have tangibles for kids, not just living in the world of ideas. I know I keep bringing up my grandkids, but I spent the weekend with all of them. And another thing that happened yesterday is when my boyfriend and I, who goes by grandpa, he's their, kind of grandpa in their lives too. When we arrived, Lavender grabbed a clipboard and a pen and started making boxes of all the things we were going to do that day. And she checked them off as we went. And when her parents got home, she said, we forgot to do bird watching. So we immediately got binoculars, stood at the window until we had identified 2 birds, checked it off. Then we could go home. The clipboard, the magic of a checklist, the pink pen. I mean, these things help learning. They frame learning. She had written on there, she wanted to read me a book. When her mom got home, she said, I put the bookmark back in the same place because I want to read to you as well. Like, this is learning. Give them concrete, physical representations. That helps you also feel grounded that learning has taken place.
Okay, as our kids get older and we're helping them gain competency in certain areas of skills and knowledge, how do we find a balance? How do we help them strive for, quality and achieve quality, whether it's of writing or understanding of a math concept, without going too far in the direction either of where perfectionism kicks in for them or where it's maybe too loose?
I mean, I love that question because I think that is why fear of messing up is so prominent for us. We're always going to be toggling between structure and freedom, rigor, not a word I love, and ease. But that is part of the journey. If we can see our homeschools more like an accordion that goes in and out, or like the tides, like you talk about high tide and low tide, or seeing it as this dialogue between structure and freedom, we will get there. We don't have to balance any one day or even any one season. It's sort of an overarching balance. I know for me, we love to give this example, and it was an example from my own life. The fall was when my learning was the most structured. We used to say, fall is classical education, winter is Charlotte Mason, and spring is unschooling. And what I really meant by that is in the fall, I was much more likely to have a very clear plan. We're going to read these books. We're going to do this kind of copy work. We're going to learn about this history. We're going to start our math books. We're going to get a certain distance, and the routine would feel kind of crisp, and the books felt crisp in correspondence. But by the time winter comes along, we're in need of like some crafty hand projects. We enjoy having some art study and music and leaning into the arts a little bit, going to a museum here and there, watching, a musical on television or at an actual performance center, handcrafts, listening to read alouds. It's this sort of like hominess that Charlotte Mason engenders. But once the spring breaks and the weather changes, we just want to get out of Dodge, man. we want to go places, on hikes, on walks, plant a garden, have some freedom to do sports or our favorite activities and not feel guilty about it. I think if you give yourself a framework like that and you recognize that each season has its own sort of rhythmic dynamic, then you won't hold the spring accountable to the same standards as the fall. And that I think is really important.
Oh, I love the way you put that. It's so true. That's why the high tide, low tide system worked for my family so well. It allowed for natural shifts in energy and inclination. When I think about like trying to find this balance between wanting to help my kids get good at things, right? But not wanting to apply these outcome-based standards and let perfectionism creep into the experience, I always come back to the words competency and confidence. That's my goal, is to help them achieve competency and confidence. And part of confidence is the confidence to try something, to take that risk, to mess it up, to not have fear of messing up, have acceptance of messing up, and the grit to try again.
That's such a beautiful description. And here's what can support that. Stop setting goals for your kids. Let them set the goals. Let them test their mettle. Let them decide what days they want to put in extra work and what days they need to back off and just practice what's easy. We talk about this in The Brave Learner with interval training. It's very similar to learning to run a marathon. You don't just every day increase by a mile. There are days when you back off and do very few miles. There are rest days. There are days where you walk and run. You don't only run. And then every week, there's the day that we call the long run day, the stretch day. And that incrementally goes up over time. We even spend days where the only goal is to do hills. We call these the hill runs. And those days are really hard. You do not run 18 miles of hills. You run a couple miles, but they're hard because they're all up and downhill. These are ways to think about working on math, working on reading, working on spelling, anything that requires like skill building can have this interval effect where there's a stretch day and then the other days are alternating in lengths, energy, focus, and rest.
Right. You've just reminded me, there's this app that I love to use. It's called Pacemaker. It's for writing projects. And you know, like what your rough word count needs to be and what the timeline is. And just to give yourself some benchmarks to hit, you can structure it so that it's the same amount of effort every day, or it can be a mountain where you start small and then you're doing big push in the middle and it gets easier toward the end. It can be a valley, which is the opposite. It can fluctuate, or just start small and get harder, all the way to the end. So every day you're writing a little more, a little more, a little more. I love that there are so many times when I hit a point in the writing where I feel stuck. And all I do is go to that app and recalibrate. I pick a different shape. It instantly makes a different map for me. And suddenly my vision of the project has changed and the effort involved in the project and the expanse of time. The relationship is different.
Can you put the link to that app in the show notes? That is exactly what I'm talking about. Only I love that it has shapes, right? Like that's amazing. So in the Brave Learner, it's pages 170 to 172, where I talk about interval training. And here's what it would look like if you were to use math with this idea. And then you can layer on top of it Melissa's ease to difficulty, or the start hard, go easy, end hard, whatever shape. But Monday would be like doing 3 problems of math. And let's say you just let your kid pick which 3 problems on this page. Tuesday, 5 problems. They can pick the 5 or you pick the 5. Wednesday, 3 problems. Thursday, you take the day off. And on Friday, you say to your child, let's do a stretch day. And they're like, okay, I'm going to try to do 8 problems. And then on the weekend, go and play Yahtzee for fun to reinforce what happened during the week. By setting it up in this kind of like fluctuating mode, you also appeal to a child's relief that the challenge is not monotonously hard, right?
Right.
There is that feeling sometimes of like, my life is never changing. I have to do 10 even problems every day for the rest of my life, and I don't know why. So, the other way to do this is to let chance decide. So if you have a single die, it's only going to be 1 through 6 problems, right? If you use 2 die, the most they could do is 12. But that also creates a little incentive because you didn't decide it and they didn't decide it. It's just a random number.
And what that does is put the spotlight back on the process, the experience, rather than some invisible goal outcome at the end of a slog, right?
Exactly. Right. And, something that you mentioned taking these intelligent risks. I think it's good to remember that you're learning to be a homeschooler and you don't already know. So that's okay too. And let your kids in on that. I think we do so much planning off stage. Like we're supposed to just automatically know. It's okay to say to your kids, hey, this morning I am going to be planning what we're doing for history over the next month. Go play. When I'm done, I'll call you to lunch and we're going to go over it and see if there's any ideas you have that I haven't thought of or any that I thought of that you think are dumb. Include them. Let them be a part of this conversation and let them know you're learning how to be their best educator.
That's true. And you know what? You already have a lot of experience at that kind of learning as you go, just from raising them from infancy, right? Learning how to burp them, learning how to put on a diaper that when you pick up the baby, it doesn't slide right off. Ask me how I know.
Yeah, or even just all the little things that you do intuitively, how you mirror their face and you give them they drop the block and you pick it up and hand it back to them. These are all the same behaviors that happen in homeschool. It's just that we have been trained by school not to remember that you can do that. Right. You can actually mirror what they're doing. You can say, you want to watch me do it before you do it. I can do that as many times as you need me to. We would never say, okay, here's a fork. I'm never showing you how to use it again. Like as, oh, you need help tying your shoes? Well, I already showed you how. I can't help you anymore. Right?
Right.
It reminds me of when your child learns how to walk. We do not require them to walk everywhere. We use strollers and backpacks. If we go to Disneyland, they are not walking, those toddlers, even though they know how. And that is true with learning how to do arithmetic. That's true with learning how to read. When you see the energy fail, it is okay for you to take over and to keep modeling and to support them so they develop the stamina.
Well, that connects to another question I have. I think a lot of parents have experience with a kid whose perfectionism seems innate. It seems like they're the ones who are applying some kind of impossible standard, and they have this perception that mistakes are failure, which leads to them getting frustrated or quitting. And I think that sometimes a custom tailored homeschooling experience can kind of accidentally spark these perfectionist feelings for kids because they don't experience failure as often because we're doing this warm, connected, learning as we go experience. So then something comes along that they're really struggling with. It's hard. And they just think, oh, I can't do this. And they want to know about. What do we do?
That is something I think everybody experiences at some point. A child who seems to be holding themselves to a higher standard than you are. There are a couple of things to do. One joke I have is that perfectionism is a genetic trait. It just gets inherited from the parent. And whenever I say that, parents always say, I am not a perfectionist. But you know what is interesting? You may not think you are because, you leave the dishes out during lunch, but there is a certain pride that you take when your child achieves, and that can create that condition. I'll give you a great example. My son, Noah, we were doing free writing with him. He's our oldest child. His father and I were both writers. His dad was a writing instructor at university level, right? And worked on a magazine. And I wrote freelance and was published writer. And so we set up all this free writing, and Noah just kept fighting it and didn't love it. I finally said, what's going on here? And he says, look, I know you've told me it doesn't matter if I make mistakes, but you and dad are both writers, and I know you'll just be happier if I do well. And it was such a realization for me. Like there was truth in that. Like I knew what I was hoping to read, right? And he was measuring himself against professionals, right? It would be like a kid who's trying to play basketball and their dad is the basketball coach. It's a different kind of pressure. So we talked about how to relieve pressure. And two of the things we came up with was no clock. He couldn't do it to a timer. And he could keep some of his writing private that I never read. So this was us collaborating to remove the perfectionism pressure. I think the way we do it is we acknowledge that it exists and we collaborate to find whatever releases that pressure.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, that makes sense. Something else that I did was made sure that my kids saw me being bad at some things.
So true.
I tried to learn to draw, right? And did it in public. I like to talk about learning in public, letting them see my attempts and where things go awry, and finishing things and helping them see concretely that I always say, I think they'll put it on my tombstone. Done is better than perfect. Let's just finish it and we'll try again. We'll try the next thing.
It's also worth it to admire a kid who has high standards for themselves. As a backward way of approaching this, like, you really care. How amazing that you care about getting these problems right or making your handwriting look beautiful. When kids are first learning, they're measuring themselves against skilled adults. Their handwriting doesn't look like a skilled handwriting from an adult. Their math doesn't line up perfectly on the page the way their parent drew the problem. They try to draw a house and it doesn't look like their dad, who's an artist, right? Like they see the gap and they don't know how to get over that hurdle. So support in that moment is also valuable. Saying, I know that you know what it looks like to do it really well. It must be frustrating to have a high standard and not be able to hit it yet. I want to give you, support and a realistic picture of how long it takes to get really good at this thing. And we're going to break it down and do it a little by little until you get there. That's another way to address it. A kid who's like, why can't I spell every word perfectly? Well, the way we get there is by misspelling them and then correcting them, and then it will stick in your mind. So that's why we do it this way, right? Like, let them in on the strategy that will eventually support their goal of doing things perfectly.
Yes. You've just sent me to look up that quote by Ira Glass. It's where he talks about, you have taste. You recognize that there's a gap between what you consider to be good, successful work and your ability right now in this moment to get there. And that's a wonderful thing. I'm paraphrasing. I'll look for the real quote, Julie.
The other person who says exactly that is Betty Edwards in Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain. She said most people tap out of drawing from scratch, drawing representationally at fourth grade, because that's when it becomes very clear to them that what they're drawing does not look realistic. Up until that point, most children are happy to draw the stick figure house, the child with a big eyes and a happy smile. But then they hit fourth, fifth grade, and suddenly they're frustrated that they cannot make their hand reproduce what they see. And that's the whole reason her book exists. She says we should be teaching drawing representationally the same way we teach how to spell, how to write, how to read, how to do math. And it can amazingly be taught. And it's not that hard to teach. That's what's mind-blowing to me. When I first did her book, I was like, I wish someone had showed this to me a long time ago. Because once you make that pivot, you'll never go back. You'll draw better for the rest of your life. So what I took from that was whenever there's a standard, like how to cook, how to garden, that looks out of reach, there are people who have actually identified the steps to get me there. And I've just got to find that pathway and take it. Perfectionism is this belief that where I am and where I want to go is immediate. It'll happen tomorrow. I can just do it now. And that's why it's dangerous. But having a high standard for yourself and then being diligent about finding the path to get you there, that's what competency and confidence come from, right?
Yes.
So even as a home educator, if right now you're listening to this and you're like, oh my gosh, I've done so many things wrong. No, you haven't. You are right now, by listening to this podcast regularly, learning what is the pathway to being an effective home educator. And that competence is going to just keep growing because you're being diligent about adopting a path that gets you there.
I found the Ira Glass quote I was looking for, and it ends with what you just said, so it's perfect. He says, nobody tells this to people who are beginners. I wish someone had told me. All of us who do creative work, and I'm going to interject that homeschooling is creative work.
Absolutely.
We get into it because we have good taste, but there is this gap. For the first couple years you make stuff, it's just not that good. It's trying to be good. It has potential, but it's not. But your taste, the thing that got you into the game, is still killer. A lot of people never get past this phase. They quit. And then I'm going to jump down to the end of his quote. He says, it's going to take a while. It's normal to take a while.
Wow. That is the perfect conclusion to this amazing discussion. Fear of messing up is simply not being willing to take the necessary time to get where you're trying to go. And it will stop you from getting there if you focus on the mess ups instead of on learning the path. And the path is available, and you will take little detours and you'll take risks and learn from those, and that will make you better. And that's true for your kids too. And let them in on it so they know that that's how life is and they don't have to live under this perfectionism standard.
That's right. Then you can embrace the joy of messing up.
That's right. Thank you, Melissa. What a great topic.
Thanks, Julie.
We will look forward to gathering with you again next week for another Brave Writer podcast. In the meantime, check out the show notes for the link to that very interesting app that Melissa mentioned, or to order the Brave Learner if you need some reminders about interval training. And we will link to the Substack article from Brave Learning with Julie Bogart that was the inspiration for today's podcast topic. Thanks, everybody. Okay, that's another Brave Writer episode in the books. Thanks for joining Melissa and me today. We love it when you leave us reviews, when you send us comments via text message. We read them all. We also couldn't do this show without our fabulous production team at Nova, or Jeanette Hall, the Brave Writer team member who handles all those administrative details you know nothing about. In the meantime, we hope that you have a fantastic week. Keep going, think well. We're rooting for you.